Hello and welcome to Cool Coffee with Kansas Principals. By and for school administrators, this podcast is intended to promote candid discussion and insight about our great profession. My name is Rick Sola, and as Communications Director for the Kansas Principals Association, I am the host, but I am certainly not the feature. Sit back, take a sip, and enjoy. This is Cool Coffee with Kansas Principals. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to Cool Coffee, a Principals panel edition. We have four amazing principals here from across this wonderful state of Kansas. I'll have them introduce themselves in a bit, but today's panel will be served up some questions created by the Baker University's Fall 2025 cohort, which are all students working toward their building level licensure program. They are future administrators. Special shout out to Shelby Muha from this cohort who helped facilitate the creation of these questions, and with the aim of going beyond the surface level and into the nuts and bolts of administration. We know there are many ways to skin a cat, which is just really one of the most awful sayings. I apologize for putting that in there. So for those listening who are in their chair, compare your response with how our panel responds. There are often many right answers, perhaps even many more wrong answers, but still there are many correct answers. So with that, let's meet our panel today, and they're going to share their name, position, school, and their number of years in the chair. Let's start with Midge.
I'm Midge Simmons. I'm an elementary principal at Grandview Elementary in El Dorado. I've been in the chair too long. All good, though. I do feel like I'll be ending my career here in El Dorado, but we'll see how life takes us. But I've been in education for 29 years and 19 as an elementary principal. This is my third school to be an elementary principal. So
awesome. Welcome, Midge. Jenny.
Thank you.
Oh, I think you're on mute, Jenny. There you go.
Not a good way to start. Okay. I'm Dr. Jenny Woolever. I am the principal at Washington Elementary in the Olathe School District. I've served as a principal for 13 years. 4 of those have been in middle school, and the remainder have been in elementary.
Awesome. Robert.
Hey, I'm Robert Cave. I'm an assistant principal at Piper High School in Kansas City, Kansas. I spent 23 years teaching in Olathe schools and was part of the Baker admin cohort in 2018, and finally got a job at Piper High School, and this is my 4th year there. So I've been in education about 27 years, only 4 as an administrator. The rest as a teacher.
Awesome. And Travis.
Hello, everybody. I'm Travis Rogers, currently principal at Wichita South High School. This is my 19th year in education, 12th year as an administrator, and I'm just started my 5th year as principal here at South High School in USD 259.
Awesome. Well, once again, I want to welcome all of you, and it was great because we're recording this the week after the KPA conference, and I was able to see many of you there. It was a great conference, and it was actually neat. At one point, I think we were all in the same session. But thanks again for coming on to this podcast and being able to share specifically to our Baker friends out there in this cohort, but also to all who are listening. And so we're gonna kick it off here. And so these questions again were generated from the Fall 2025 Baker University Future Administrator Program. And so I'm going to start here with a question that kind of applies to all of us. And Midge, we'll start with you, but we'll hear from everybody. But going way back, why did you decide to become an administrator, and how has that why changed throughout the year or throughout the years?
Well, I was ready to answer number 1, Rick. You've jumped us to number 8.
I won't go out of order after this. I just thought that was a good kickoff. Sorry about that. A little curveball.
You're good. I probably will give an answer that not many would say. Honestly, I was bored. I was bored teaching. I think it was, at the time I was teaching middle school, and I had maybe 1 to 2 preps, and I just needed something more. And I always had aspirations of trying to make more of a difference than what you can in a classroom. and trying to reach out to others with more of a difference. And so I know that sounds kind of, I don't know what the word for that is, that most people would give that in an interview type question, but it's the truth. I wanted to have a greater capacity of being able to make a change, or trying to make a difference. Um, I don't know. I think for me, I've learned that it's not always about the difference in pay in the education world or the administrative world, but it has a lot more to do with the support that you receive. I've had some varying experiences being an administrator in 3 different districts at 3 different levels, going from 3A to 2A, and now I'm at 4A level. I just think that the support that you get from a superintendent and a board is huge. That that to me makes the biggest difference. And I think I've seen that over the years. And I've left districts because I didn't feel that support, whether it was superintendent or the board. And it's time to move on and try and make a difference somewhere else. And so, yeah.
Great.
You
Yeah.
guys have anything?
Yeah. Travis, we'll kick it to you. Why did you become an administrator?
Yeah, so I had a really good experience. I taught PE actually here at South High School. And so about year 4 or 5, really started to reflect and think about what my next chapter was going to look like. And I was always interested in like the functions of a school. And so I had about 150 kids throughout my PE classes. Again, was able to coach some things. Again, had a really good experience, but I wanted to make a greater impact. And I thought growing personally and professionally was very important. And so what's funny now, in my 12th year, you're still coaching, you still mentor, but now you're on a bigger scale. And so now you're involved, with families, parents, the staff. And so it's kind of like pieces of the puzzle. I say that often. And so you're trying to put all the pieces of the puzzle, and depending on your school, depending on your situation, depending on the day, you could have a couple pieces that you got to put together, or you could have a lot. And so it's really been impactful, but really truly serving your why is serving your people. And so it's all about that personal and professional growth. And in this role, it can happen every hour.
Absolutely. Great. Robert.
For me, I was in the classroom. I didn't know if I was ever going to be an administrator. That wasn't ever my end goal. I thought I was going to be probably a lifelong teacher, and I kept finding myself in kind of thrust into different leadership roles, whether it would be curriculum, whether that be, writing different things, or department chairs, BLT chairs, those sorts of things. And kind of like what Midge says, I found myself kind of yearning for a little bit of a different side of education, for a different way to impact not only students, but to impact teachers and try to help support them and kind of be the one to help lift them up and help students achieve. And found myself, getting another master's in the Baker cohort, and getting that school leadership and really finding a passion for that. And so ended up just kind of throwing myself into that. So, my biggest fear was that I would miss out on kind of the relational aspect that you'll have as a teacher. That was kind of why I still did it. I loved being with students. I loved seeing them grow. I loved all of those things. But you find that you still get to have that as an administrator. It's just at a different level. Now you have it with the teachers. Now you can impact things in different ways, and your scope of and sphere of influence really grow in that way. So I found that to be still pretty powerful, and it's kept me, still wanting to be in education and be an advocate for educators instead of just the ones that we're educating.
Awesome. Jenny?
Well, I think others saw it in me first before I really wanted to come to fruition that then I probably will be a principal. I went through my schooling and I actually started towards my doctorate. I didn't have any kind of educational leadership previously for that. I went into ed tech, did some other things. But the reason I was pursuing my doctorate, I was interested in teaching those that wanted to become teachers and become in education. During that is when others saw it in me and said, you really need to go back and get your certification in educational leadership. And so I think with their encouragement is what drove me into this. And just kind of like what Midge said too, is that I actually went to a math specialist first because I was so worried about leaving that role, like many of you guys said. But the greater impact you do have as you kind of go through as a specialist and then as a administrator, I really felt like I could really impact not just my classroom but a whole building.
That's great. I love hearing all of your whys, and I think it highlights that there's no one road to this chair, and that's usually how we start the show, is your road to the chair. And I hear so often how, kind of like what Jenny said, didn't necessarily think about it for myself. Somebody else may have discovered it. All four of you described a much different path and why. And for those who are listening who may be in a teaching role right now, I think that's important to realize. Like, sometimes I think we feel like, we have to emulate somebody who we're with or near. There's a lot of different ways to get there, and at different trajectories, different timing as well. We'll go into the first question, Midge. I'll go to you as far as the first one in order. I guess we'll be back in order here. Is perhaps one of the most important things, if not the most important thing we do, and that's hiring. And we hire candidates that we are hoping will be a good fit. But what is it, Midge, that you are looking for in teaching candidates for your building, and then what do you tend to avoid?
Well, for me, a lot of times my husband's also a principal, and so he has laughed at me over the years because when I am down to the wire, you've got it narrowed down to two candidates and you're trying to make some decisions and they all have great qualities and they all have some negatives. When you're trying to figure out which one to go with, he always says to me, "What's your gut say?" And he makes fun of me because he says, when your gut is right, it's right. And when it's not, it's not. And you, 9 times out of 10, are always right with your gut. And he's right. I mean, all the hiring I've done over the years, it does come down to what do I feel in my gut. But the biggest things for me is going to be when I'm looking across the table at somebody that we're interviewing, it has everything to do with relationships. And I don't mean just relationships with kids, relationships with other staff as well. Do they fit the mission and the vision of our building and where we're headed in the future? Do they fit the mold of the teammate that they're going to work with, right? I mean, I have teachers that we all team teach on our grade levels at the elementary level, and if I feel like it's not the right fit, it's not the right fit. It doesn't mean that the teacher won't be good and couldn't be a great candidate for us. It's just, if the fit isn't there, it's not. I feel like sometimes we think a GPA is everything, but a GPA to me tells me whether a teacher is going to have a good work ethic. That's what a GPA tells me is whether they have a work ethic. If the person can't relate to others, they could be a straight A student, have all these honors, but if they can't relate to others and be able to build relationships with kids and with staff, I'm not going to find them to be a coachable person to hire. And that's the other thing that I really look for is, you find out what somebody's faults are through an interview. And I always ask myself, if they have that kind of fault, can I support that as a principal? Can I coach them through that and coach them up on that? And there are times when you interview teachers and you look at somebody and think, I don't know if I can coach that. I don't know what supports I can bring in to help them, and maybe they're not the right fit for that. I laughed when I read this question because I was reflecting back to what did this look like 19 years ago when I started as a principal. And I literally I remember sitting at my desk one time to hire an elementary teacher, and I literally had 2 feet worth of files to go through to hire one position. And now we're lucky if we get one application at times, right? Especially you guys that are at the high school or middle school level. I know it sometimes gets worse than some of those, but it's amazing in the 19 years how much that's changed in our profession, and it's sad. And I want more for this profession that's given me a life, you know. So nowadays we're lucky. We want to find people that definitely have some sort of a license. We run into some cases where we try. I mean, here at El Dorado, we try and avoid anybody that doesn't have any license, if we can, because we do get applicants that have no license. They're still working on it or whatever program that they have, and I feel like as a principal, I have to be more open-minded for that coachable piece in hiring teachers.
So I really like that you brought up your gut and kind of looking at the panel here. And I agree with that. There's so many times where you've got to go with your gut. Has your gut ever let you down in a hiring situation?
It's funny because the last school that I left, I hired somebody before I left, and my gut felt funny, but I didn't have any other applicants to fill the position, and we had to go with it. And then I didn't plan on leaving. I hired him, I think, late April, and I ended up leaving in early June to come here, and it was not a good situation. They ended up non-renewing and barely made it through the school year. So, no, my gut failed me on that one, but
Yeah.
I didn't reap the negatives of it.
Well, it can cut both ways. I'm sure we've all been burned by hiring. If you don't trust your gut and that fails, that's really hard to swallow, at least for me. Like if I go against my instinct because, so I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's a really important piece. Robert, I'm going to kick it to you. How do you keep your cool when staff or students come to you with an issue that is a 10 on the emergency scale for them, but it's absolutely not a 10 for you?
Well, I think, the biggest thing is to listen. I think that can be so hard because we can be pulled in so many different directions, and you can have 5 different things happening and someone comes to talk to you or someone comes to report something to you, and you have to really be intentional about giving them the space they need and giving them the space to air their grievance or tell you what's happening. I tell students and teachers all the time, thank you for coming to me. I really validate your feelings or, what's going on. And I just want them to, I hope that I have built enough trust in them that they trust me to say, thank you. Let me take this burden on, let me take this on now. Let me do it so that you don't have to worry about it. And I'll let you know, when we have a resolution or what happens. So I think that the biggest thing is listening, getting them the right, in the mindset of letting them know that I will find a solution. I will figure this out. And then, that comes with having that relationship. It takes a while to build that, I think, but you hope that you are, reliable enough that you have not, burned them in the past or whatever, that, you have enough follow through, that they trust you to handle it and take care of those things. But I think the biggest thing is we don't need to tell them, hey, calm down. This is not the right, you're not thinking about this correctly. It doesn't help to say that. I think the best thing to say is, okay, thank you so much. I hear what you're saying. Will you do you trust me? Let me take care of it. Will you let me be the person that handles it? And if they say yes, then I think you just add that to your to-do list and the things you do, and then make sure you follow up with that person. But I think it's important to listen, and it's important to validate why it's important to them. The choir teacher has to pass out. They were so worried because their delivery for their cookie dough fundraisers is coming at 2:00 today, and we had to have a plan to how we're going to distribute the cookie dough. And it's like, to them, it has to be done right now during their plan period. And I said, let me handle it. I'll make the plan for you. I'll take care of it. I'll let you know what the plan is. I'll communicate that to the staff, and we'll go from there. And that just, okay, they can take a breath now. So I think that's important, to listen, validate, and then have follow through when you solve their issue.
One piece that wasn't included in the question is the parent angle as well. Sometimes we get those calls from parents, and it's an urgent matter, or you get the message like so and so needs you to call back immediately, and you hear it, and thankfully maybe it's not as big of a deal, but for them it's still gigantic. How often do you find it that it occurs often that you just have to listen, and by the time, especially a parent, by the time they get to the end of their, whether it's venting or sharing, it feels better, and it's almost resolved itself just by being the listening ear? I see a lot of nodding heads, but Robert, have you found that?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Rick. I've really found that to be the case. A lot of times they just want someone to talk to, someone just to listen, to say, here is the issue I'm having. And a lot of times it's not even having a solution. Sometimes it's just, thank you so much for sharing. We will work on getting better. Or thank you for sharing. Let me take care of this. Or here is what we're going to do about this. Here's our protocols. Here are the things that we're going to do. So I think a lot of times, I think you're exactly right. They just want someone to listen to, like I said before, I repeat it a lot, but validate their feelings and understand where they're coming from. And sometimes you have to let them know, I will get, here's the kind of the process we're going to go through to do this. It might not be on your time, but here's the steps that we have to take. But I think you're right. Almost, I would say, 85, 90% of the time, once you have that discussion, by the end of the discussion, they feel better. They are not as in a rush to get things accomplished as they were to start. So I think that is very important, especially when it comes to those parents and those stakeholders.
One thing I've learned is when I get the email from a parent that demands a meeting ASAP that day, but let me know a time available, all those things, I never respond to the email. I pick up the phone, and
Yep.
90% of the time, the phone call takes care of it, and there's no need for a meeting. And I find that to be helpful. But I have kind of discovered that you just never know when people hear information. Sometimes it's an immediate respond, email or whatever. So yeah, that listening piece is critical.
Yeah, and that's something I would say to the cohort too. Listening is prepare just to be a conversationalist. Prepare to. I always prefer making a phone call now. I would much rather call a parent than email a parent. I just like having those phone calls, and I think that I think it tones down whatever vitriol they may have or that is coming through in the email when you reach out to them. So I would say, and I think parents really appreciate that too, the time you're taking. So I would say anytime you have a parent that's demanding a meeting with those sorts of things, I think, Rick, you hit the nail on the head. Call them and just say, hey, I just want to respond to what you're saying. And half the time they might still want a meeting, and a lot of the times they're going to say, thank you so much, and I'll get back to you through email or whatever if I can when we solve the problem. But I think you're exactly right. Just prepare yourself to be making parent phone calls and be getting comfortable with making parent phone calls.
Yeah.
I tell my teachers, my counselors all the time, if you need me to call someone, let me know. I will reach out. And that's just a big part of our job, I think.
Yeah, it's so much more efficient, I think, too.
Yes,
It takes me a
100%.
while. I'm going to craft an email that I want to be really thoughtful about, and by the time I'm half
Yep.
an hour into it, perhaps. So,
Absolutely.
Travis, I'm going to go to you here. A little change of subject, and also not a very pleasant part of administration, perhaps. But how do you handle, both practically and mentally and emotionally, issues that pop up that escalate so quickly and they end up in the news? Whether it's handled correctly or not, in your control or not, how do you handle that as a building principal?
Yeah, the first tip I got is just take a deep breath. And so anytime an emergency happens or a situation takes place, people are going to look at you, how you react, how you respond, your demeanor, just the steps that you take. And so it's very important that you got to take a deep breath and stay calm. And truly the reality is whether you have a good crisis plan team, you got the communication set up, you're never fully going to be prepared for every emergency. And so you got to have the practice in place. That's why we have drills. That's why we have the communication chains. And then you got to be mindful of, you got to be transparent, but then you have to filter what you can say and what you should not say at that time. And so emotionally, you got to take care of yourself. You got to reflect. I think it's very important to reflect whenever something happens, what went well, what did not. We have found great value here at South that when a situation happens and it could involve like the police, teachers are still teaching and the kids are still in the classroom. And so we have found great value in, social media is a rapid fire. And so sometimes it's not the truth or the right information. And so my staff really does appreciate if we have something big that pops off. Hey guys, we're going to have an optional staff debrief after school. If you want to attend, that is great. And usually that kind of calms things down to where they hear it from me, that these are the truths, this is what happens, this is what we're investigating, and so on. And then as a principal, you just have to be mindful of social media after the fact, or if it hit the news, could be the truth, it could not. Be very mindful of the comments. If you're sitting at home at night and you're scrolling through all the comments and you know what the truth is and it's not, to me that doesn't tie into your mental health, and so you got to be really careful of that.
How would you say, for any of you, you've evolved over the time of being a principal? Travis referenced inaccurate information, and perhaps it's critical of you, or it's critical of the building, or critical of a teacher, and it's not accurate. But there's also only so much that we are allowed to share. Is that something, you talk about having thick skin? Would you just put it up as over time you get thicker skin, or is there something you intentionally do to really kind of help with that, or things that you have found a strategy to say what you can say that kind of, like Travis said earlier, putting minds at ease?
I'll start it. For me, like when Robert talked about social media, or you talked about, picking up the phone and calling the parent, we had that discussion. I was thinking in my mind, I do that same thing when I find out things are on social media too. If something's being said out there that's incorrect information and I know who's saying it, I'll pick up the phone and call that parent and just say, hey, I saw your post. I just wanted to clarify with you, and have that conversation about it. And it usually, that post will end up being deleted. And I think that's just to make parents aware that you're mindful of this, and that it's out there and you want to address it. And 9 times out of 10, I'm finding out that people are receptive to that. But in a case of what Travis is talking about, if it's a crisis situation, that's a little bit different. For me, I also, just to kind of piggyback a little bit on Travis, to me, when I read that question of yours, Rick, the first thing I thought of was you always go back to your policies, and you got to know your policies. So when you're in that heat of the moment, and what can you say or not say, to me it just always goes back to that, or what you say later on, right? Because you're if it's a newsworthy situation, it's probably something that's going to be ongoing. You're not going to deal with it for just that day, but just knowing what you can and can't do, and backing yourself with your board policies or anything. So I don't know, that's enough for me. Maybe somebody else can comment more about what Rick asked. But.
Yeah, well, Midge, I agree with you too, is that the same concept like Robert was talking about listening, doing the same thing under a crisis as well, that allowing them to express how they're feeling, but also, now, these are our policies. This is what we have to follow. This is what I'm doing. Sometimes telling them the active plan that we have in process. I may not be able to share what's happening with the other student. I may not be able to share this, but I know it. I'm on it. And just reassuring them that way. I've done a lot of that too, because just checking in with them and letting them know you received the message, you are aware of this issue, and you're handling it.
Yeah. Well, always... And there's no situation like that is a cookie cutter from a previous situation. So I always keep any communications I put out. I have a whole file of them, but they're never just copy and paste into a new situation. You can reference them, but everything's so nuanced along the way. So,
but yes, Rick, you have a thicker skin after so many years. 19 of them. Yeah, my skin's a little thick.
Yeah. And I think some of that comes with confidence too. You think
Yes.
back of your first couple of years, and a lot of questioning of, I don't know, did I make the wrong decision here? Things are blowing up. with experience, you start to have a lot more confidence, and I think that helps with the thick skin. Thank you for listening, and join us for the rest of this conversation, including to hear what was your welcome to admin moment in part 2 of this principal panel episode of Cool Coffee with Kansas Principals. Check the notes section for more information on this episode and to learn more about the KPA and its mission to develop and support all principals through optimized learning, collaborative leadership, networking, and service. Be sure to check back in for our next episode and spread the word about Cool Coffee with Kansas Principals. Catch you next time.